The sun has left and forgotten me.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. Why do I call myself a story maker? Because if you want to tell good stories, you have to make them first. That means stepping out of your comfort zone, doing things you wouldn't normally do, and maybe connecting with people that are different from you. Doing things that make you make stories. And just a reminder for you listeners, hopefully you're making stories at work every day, and each of those stories can contribute to your story collection for your next interview, or even when you're networking with people who can think of you for new projects and promotions within your organization. The best way to collect the right stories for the right moments is to start with my job interview storytelling course on Udemy. Check out the details at elkinsconsulting.com. Listeners, you're in for a treat today. My friend Sophie Lechner introduced me to today's guest, Mark Ainley. And I'm not even going to begin to describe this man because as soon as you hear what he does for his clients, you're going to want to know more. And just remember, any link that we talk about, links to find Mark, will be at the podcast show notes at elkinsconsulting.com on the podcast page. Mark, welcome to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Lovely to be here.
Oh, it's such a treat. I mean, when Sophie makes an introduction, my ears perk up.
Same for me.
Yes. So you know how I begin this because you've listened to some of my episodes. I would love for you to share with our audience something about you that most people might not know. It's not on your LinkedIn profile. It's not in your bio. Something that will share with our audience a little insight into who you are before we dive into what you do.
Okay. Well, most people who follow my professional page on LinkedIn will not know that I am an expert in historical piano recordings, in the sense of know the whole history of from the dawn of recording in the late 1800s all the way through, and specializing in recordings up to pre-war or 1950. I can often identify a pianist by the sound that they produced. I know I have thousands of hours of recordings, and I've produced CDs, co-produced CDs, anthologies of these historical recordings. When I was 25, one of them won a German Music Critics Award.
Wow.
And I write a column for International Piano Magazine called Historical Perspectives. And it does actually, as much as it seems like a sharp left turn or something out of left field from what it is that I do professionally and the main topic we're focused on, there are a lot of connecting threads, which I think speaks to also what it is that I do, because everything connects to everything else. So I'm really interested in what these recordings point out. Every musician has the same printed notes in front of them. And yet, ideally, and it was different in the past, everybody would give their own style of performance that fits with the music, but also fits with who they are and their perspectives. And nowadays, everything's gotten a little more streamlined. We live in what one musicologist called the age of anonymity. You listen to all these different recordings, you can't tell who's playing. Everything sounds kind of the same. And you listen to recordings from the 20s, 30s, 40s. I can identify a lot of pianists just by the sound within about 3 seconds. I can tell that's so-and-so because the actual sound they produced and their whole approach was so different. And this is what interests me in terms of how much are we trying to be all alike as opposed to producing our own sound, being who that we really are. And even if we're using the same template, there's something that's different.
What do we bring?
What do we bring to wherever it is that we are, wherever it is? How do we show up as ourselves and work according to the situation? Because, each composer has their own style. So you're going to play them according to the style of the music, but also within your style. How do these two blend? As opposed to one overrides the other, which I think is very much what's happening in our very polarized fit in as opposed to belong kind of time.
So there's an interesting connection here that I'm making, and I know you're not surprised by this, but obviously anything music resonates with me. See how I Did a little pun
Yes,
there.
exactly.
But what you're talking about is especially important to me as a musician because vocalists are doing the same thing. I notice because I sing a couple of original songs with one of our bands, but I do a lot of covers. And one of the things that I have always worked on is to come up with my own take on these songs so
Mhm.
that it doesn't sound like I'm trying to emulate somebody else.
Yes.
There are some amazing musicians out there who can sound just like the original artists. We have a band here in where I live in Helena, Montana, that does an uncanny cover of many of those 80s tunes that I can't stand to hear anymore because I lived with them in high school. But it's uncanny. It sounds like they're playing radio,
Yeah.
right? That is not my goal at all as a vocalist. And
Mhm.
as distinctive as certain voices can be, the same thing happens with instruments. I think of John Baptiste,
Yes.
and I know his piano against anyone else.
Mhm.
So I love that this is such a distinction for you that you are listening to that. And of course, my Strengths Finder training is coming into my head, and the words context, which is an uncanny ability to understand how history reflects the and informs the current moment and how it can predict in some ways the future. That's what people strong in context do. So you clearly have context in your top talents. And the other one that immediately popped into my head is connectedness, which is people who don't believe in coincidence, who have this ability to take the 10,000-foot view of things very quickly and see the big picture and understand how different connections are made. And these are people who have, like Sophie, these incredible small world stories where they run into people that know other people
Mhm.
everywhere they go. So
Mhm.
I love the beginning of this conversation.
Me
Thank you.
too.
All right, so let's make sure that we get to what I find especially interesting in your work, which is the way that you can associate a template, for lack of a better word, to an individual and have their unique, distinctive personality show through, regardless of how you begin with in terms of a structure, just like
Mhm.
music.
Mhm.
So this is how your work is connecting to your understanding of piano history, recording history. Wait, I have to ask one quick question before we dive into that. Are
Mhm.
you a musician? Do you play?
I used to. So I trained to a
Uh-huh.
certain degree, and mechanically, once I started listening, I just realized like I don't want to practice to the degree that would be required to be able to get there. Like my
Yep.
strength lies somewhere else.
Your strength lies in the listening.
Is the listening, and also now what I've evolved, and it's taken a while, is the capacity to articulate what I'm hearing so that people can then recognize it based on what I say.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
So many people think that they have to be musicians because they love music.
Mhm.
And oh my gosh, like my husband, he's a fantastic musician. He plays guitar. Sometimes he'll sing some songs. He's a fantastic musician. His like gift that he brings to me as a vocalist is his ear. When we're doing a new cover, like we decided to do Walking After Midnight, Patsy Cline, many years ago. And I was just singing it, the way that I liked it. And I heard lots of Patsy Cline. I heard some other covers and I was kind of singing it. He said, "No, this isn't right for your voice. Okay, we're going to go down a step. We're going to do this in B. And what
Yeah.
I want you to imagine is that you are sitting on a porch in the South, swinging and drinking lemonade, maybe spiked lemonade. And that's how I want you to sing this song."
Oh my God, yes. Yes, yes, yes. I mean,
Yes.
but it's like the story behind this, and a lot of the great musicians they had, like, you listen to, this piano piece that had no lyrics, and they would tell the
Right.
the student, this is actually kind of some top secret stuff from like, early 20th century. Make up a sentence, make up a phrase as if it was something you were singing, and then what would your inflection be, right? If
Right.
that was a poem, or if this was the story, like you bring
How would
some.
you phrase it?
How would you
Right.
phrase it? And it's literally the phrasing is all part of that. So
Oh,
yeah, I love
awesome.
it. And also the background story, which totally connects with, what it is that we're getting into here with the particular templates and the modality that we're going to be talking about.
Yay. All right. So I'm going to ask you to tell our listeners and me what you do without telling us what you do. So, in other words, what I'd like to hear is a story of working with a particular client. And what I'm looking for is having your first conversation with that person, what was exposed during that conversation, and then what your work brought to that person. What was the problem you solved, or the beauty that was the result of that work that you did with them? And I'll give you a quick example. I was working with an executive director of a nonprofit, and she asked me, she said, I have this employee that I'm having a hard time understanding. Can you look at their strengths and give me some language to use? And I said, yeah. So we met for coffee and I reviewed this person's strengths. I said, this person needs to know their role. And with all the uncertainty and all the growth of your organization, she doesn't feel like she really understands what she brings to the table and what her role is, because some of the responsibilities have been given to other people within the organization. So she is feeling a little uncertain. And with her strengths, that means she's going to get defensive and she's not going to be able to make changes that you need her to make. So she needs time to consider changes. This is not somebody that are you going to have brainstorming in a session without any background information. Give her all the information up front, 24 hours before you meet with her. Say, this is all the information I have. If you need other resources, here's where it's going to come from. And then we're going to meet tomorrow to discuss this. And I would love to hear your top 5 ideas. I said, that will bring her to the table feeling prepared and confident. By the end of the conversation, my client looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said, I feel like having this language will help me demonstrate how much I care about this employee. And I know she doesn't understand that right now. So thank you.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. So I'm not going to use any of the lingo of defining what it is that I do, and I'm just going to tell the story.
I love that you speak with your hands, by the way. Too bad our listeners didn't get to see that.
All part of it. It's all holistic. Everything's connected, which we'll be getting
connected.
Okay. So I've often taught and consulted in Japan with my professional practice. And as part of my training, other consultants, we would go into people's homes and work with the clients, and they would observe me working with the clients and lend some elbow grease to sort of make, observe what's happening in the home, what's happening in their life experience, and see what's going on. And this one lady had hired us, to take a look. And she was quite resistant. Anytime I brought up a change, she kind of was, snapping a little bit and, thinking, what do you mean you're going to do this now? What do you mean you're going to move things? Well, we've got like five extra people here. Let's take care of this. And it was like, there's something going on and it's going to take some time. I would often do 2-hour sessions as a minimum. And it was like, it can take time to sort of crack past the veneer of what's on the surface. And there was this room near the front of her home that she said, oh, I never go in there. It's just like for storage. It's like, and it took us an hour and 40 minutes before I could say, can we just go into that room and take a look? I think there might be something in there that we can integrate into your space. So we go into the room and it's stuffy, like the windows haven't been open. There's a lot of storage. There's a lot of things. And in the corner, and corners of homes are important because they're like anchor points. In the corner was a tiny black and white photo that was framed. And she's like, oh, that's me and my brother when we were kids. He died a few years ago. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Because here's this room where there's no circulation that's not being used, where this is sort of the anchor and the corner point. And everything was just kind of in disarray. I was like, can we just open the window in here? Let's open and we get some fresh air in so we can sort of clear the air, quite literally and figuratively. And I said, even this room is for storage. What if we set it up as if you're going to use it? What if we just did? We've got all these people here. Why don't we move your desk around and sort of give it a more commanding presence? And we just put a couple of things on the wall that's just going to, and she had some angel art in another room. We brought the angel and put it on the wall and put the picture of her and her brother underneath it. I'm getting goosebumps right now. And she starts melting a little bit. And 2 days later, she emails my agent and says, I'm sitting here in my new office at my new desk with new life and fresh air and feeling that I'm in control and I have a command and I'm able to make changes. And I was just like, what the heck? So a few years later, I'm at a seminar that I'm teaching, and this woman comes up to me and I did not recognize her. It was her. Her face had softened. Everything, like her whole demeanor had completely changed. And she booked me for another session because she was just like, I can't believe the changes that I went through. So what was interesting about that, I mean, many things interesting, but also the resistance. Like when we have that resistance, usually like what's behind the resistance? There's a reason for that. And if we can not push, but follow through with, shall we say, gentle persistence, we can get to the root, and then that expression can change because, we're so busy trying to change behavior, trying to change, the face of things rather than the root, the external. And this was internal. This was her being able to sort of have a present time relationship with her grief and with her dearly departed brother, and to then have some presence, her own presence completely shift. It was unbelievable the change she went through.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So we're kind of in the same business. You help declutter internal and external, and I help declutter internal and external. My work is decluttering your stories and labels that no longer fit.
Yeah.
And the external is helping people use those stories to demonstrate who they really are and who they choose to be, demonstrate the labels they want versus the labels that have been given to them.
Yes.
So your work, why don't you go ahead and let our audience know generally what you do?
Sure. I mean, the languaging I use for it is contemporary feng shui. So not just with clutter per se, but what you're saying, what everything else that you do in terms of what are your strengths? How do you show up in the world with that? How do you reflect that to yourself? How do you, and how does your home actually tell the story currently of how you're living? And then how can you reframe what you show where and why so that your most aligned story can emerge? And that starts to become your experience. So I use the term contemporary because there's a lot of historical elements to how feng shui has, it was started 3,000 or so years ago in China. We're not living 3,000 years ago in China. So this totally ties into my musical background. When things were written down back then, there were things that they didn't write down, and there was context around why they were doing that. And fast forward, when you understand how to decode, look through the black and white notation of a musical score or feng shui instructions, you can start to see, oh, this is why they said that. This is why they did that. And here's a way to do that now. So, they didn't have electricity or Wi-Fi or, indoor plumbing or electrical stoves. Right. So how we do apply some of these things in modern architecture, and working in Japan was a real boost for me, being able to understand that, how the culture is, how the architecture is, how people live is so different. We can't do one size fits all. And people, I think, tend to think that feng shui is, you just put this in that corner, you put that over there, you just have this kind of art there. And yeah, but that's everybody living according to, again, this kind of, Instagram mindset of you just all follow the same pattern. Well, no, yes and no. There's certain universalities, but then there's the individual expression of that. Right. And so I think one of the big challenges is feng shui is a foreign word. And so it automatically has some mystique or some, with how it's been presented, there's a lot of, woo-woo connotations that people have. And yet environmental psychology, it's a scientific discipline that's all about the impact of the environment, and we can include with that the built environment on human behavior and mindsets and emotional states and all of that. So there's science behind all of that.
Oh, absolutely.
And I just keep reading up on environmental psychology research and just finding, yeah, feng shui does that too in this way, and it does it in that way. And
Right. Confirmation.
that's it. And there's a new-ish sort of subset of this called biophilia, which is 14 design principles that are based on things that we see in nature. And they'll have things like, non-rhythmic sound, which, is like bubbling water, which is like a water fountain, kind of feng shui. Wind chimes, also feng shui. I mean, this is what they were doing already. And so the science supports that. The fact that these things work. Now, I'm not going to say that, every single thing you've heard about feng shui has scientific backing. It would be great to do some studying. And it's just interesting that there was this innate wisdom in a lot of the practice historically, which if it's well applied, and that's always the key, it can make a big difference on a person's experience. And that becomes then their, the story that they're living.
For sure.
And a lot of the time in this case, she wasn't paying attention to this particular aspect of her story. She wasn't this client wasn't wanting to sort of consider the grief. And she just kind of locked it away. And now she could actually showcase it, reframing it by having that angel anchoring. And we also put a lamp in that corner, and it was all illuminating. And it was just, all of this, like she was letting that be there. So her story moving forward, there's a course change. There's a trajectory shift. And I mean, you're always living some kind of story, but the reframing the inner self-talk based on what it is that you're observing and your relationship with it.
What I find, excuse me, just a second. What I find is oftentimes my clients don't actually know. They think they know what the problem is.
Yeah.
But they don't necessarily.
Absolutely.
And that happens a lot with strategic planning and the StrengthsFinder workshops I do. One company hired me to fix. They didn't say this blatantly, but they had one person in there that was the problem, right? And I was like, okay, knowing I was going in there that wasn't actually the problem. What I'd like to hear is when clearly you uncovered that in this client, that the issue wasn't what she thought it was, and the resistance was because she was holding on to something that she didn't even know she was holding on to.
Yeah.
So when was a time that you were able to, no, let's go backward. When was a time that you weren't able to do that?
Ooh, so many stories. It's just like I really work.
Yeah, I ask you that because I know that I often encounter resistance from people because they don't want to be labeled. And StrengthsFinder feels like all the other assessments that label people.
Yes.
And it's a different kind of assessment. It's not personality. It's more about how you approach things, how you problem solve. But I often come up with that resistance. And every once in a while, I fail at being able to shift that resistance.
Yeah.
And those experiences really inform the next time that I do something. So I learn so much from those experiences. So that's why I'm asking you that.
So another time in Japan, I had this client she was struggling with how other people perceived her and not being, very social or not really having many friends and so on and so forth. And there was a few things going on. The area that we would term is related to visibility and reputation is based on the fire element. So that's kind of reds and, bright colors and all of that. And with her, it was very dark. So it was the opposite. So, okay. So it's kind of raining on, putting the fire out. She also had so many designer bags, like really expensive bags that she said she had bought because she thought she would look better. So just the combination of those two factors was interesting. I was like, okay, this is not the productive way to be doing this. And so, we went at an organic pace, but there was something at some point that probably twigged for her in the session. And this is where it's challenging. And sometimes it's hard to know. And in all of our work, in anything anyone does, we can lead a horse to water. They might drink, they might spit it back out. She wrote an angry message to my promoter afterwards, just saying, I moved everything back. I just didn't want to, there was something where there was a willingness in the session and then some resistance kicked in. And this is the challenge in a way of any one-time consulting, in the sense of me going to Japan and I would go for 2 or 3 weeks, be booked solid. The opportunity for follow-up is more challenging. And also the
Mhm.
perception of feng shui is that, it's a one and done kind of thing. You just put things in the right place and then it stays there and everything's perfect forever and ever, the end. No, it's not. You're evolving. Everything's
Change can be
evolving.
hard.
Change is ongoing, and sometimes you make those changes. And what, that first lady recognized, she's like, yeah, we really did this incredible change that first time you came around. I want to further that. And I've had several,
Mhm.
my most successful clients are the ones who recognize that. And I would have, sometimes every time I went to Japan, the same person would book me again to go deeper. Because you make
Mhm.
move, you remove one block, well, now something else is possible. And you've lived in it for a little while. So now something else is possible. You start an exercise regime and you build up certain strength, and now you can start building up something else, or the same exercises aren't necessarily going to do the same thing, so you have to change
Right.
your
If
routine.
something changes in your life,
That's
like your
it.
kids move out,
Yes.
every time something changes in your life, your home, the place that you live,
Mhm.
shifts.
Should
So,
shift. I mean,
yes.
the challenge is when it doesn't, it becomes this time capsule, and then
Mhm.
you're essentially living in the past. The
Yes.
stimuli are it's pastime stimuli. It's based on a pastime choice of I'm going to put this here, I'm going to showcase here. This is what's important
Mhm.
for me. And those can evolve and
They
really
should.
they should
They have
and have
to.
to, and
Right.
I mean, they do, and you can resist the evolution or you could be unconscious to the evolution. And this is what I refer to as sometimes, I have a seminar that's called Pun Shui, where I tie in take some idioms from the English language and tie it in with a feng shui application. And
Fun. Oh, I love
that's
it.
it's
Feng
a great one.
shui.
I'm just starting to pre-record all of my seminars, and they're going to be sort of all sort of online, and that's one of the first ones because it's just great. And this one is the honeymoon is over, and I would so often go into people's homes. And there's the engagement photos, there's the wedding photos, there's the honeymoon photos, and then the kids come. And there are no more photos of the parents alone. Every
Oh,
photograph is one parent and the child, the other parent and the child, both parents with the kids, all the kids, none with the parents as a couple. So their role now has shifted. What their environment is telling them. Last time we were together was the honeymoon, and the honeymoon's over.
oh, that's so sad.
And in fact, there was kind of an amazing story within our. I have to figure out how to explain this one. There was somebody I know who was dealing with this. They had two kids who were around, 10 or under. And I mean, we could see this, and at their home, it was like literally, it was the wedding photos, honeymoon photos. That was it. Then it was kids' photos everywhere, all over the
Of
place.
course.
Kids were running the home, and it's the same thing when there's no boundary. Like every room is a toy, sort of Toy
Right.
Story. And my mother was going to visit, and I was like, try to get a photo of the two of them together without the kids.
Yes.
And my mother calls me the next day. She's like, I had my camera with me the whole night, and it was impossible to get the two of them next to each other without the
Right.
kids because it was like an expression of what was going on and how they were living. And then
Right.
years later, once the kids reached a certain point in their teens, that changed. And I went over and I saw that they had photos of the two of them together. It was amazing. It just happened organically. And so, this is just a little bit of where, what's around you, it's
Mhm.
an expression of what's going on, but then it creates a symbiotic loop that can reinforce that behavior and that mindset, which might be fully unconscious, but it then deepens, right? And just like the
Right.
river is, or the well-trodden path, it's
Right.
been through repeated use, it gets deeper and deeper. Those grooves get deeper. And
Mhm.
then it's like, wait, how do we change the story here? How do we change the
Right.
trajectory?
Well, and I'm thinking specifically about those big life changes like empty nesting and divorce and all those things. And
Hmm.
I know that there's like this, I don't know, there's some people go too far the other direction.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
I know a couple that as soon as their daughter graduated from college, they completely demolished her room, like added to the main master bedroom or something. And there's literally no place for her to stay at their house that's not like a pull-out couch or something.
Mhm.
And that hurt her. To
Yeah,
this day, it bothers her.
100%.
Um, and then I think what we're doing is I transferred one of the boys' rooms into my office, and the other room stayed a boy or guest room.
Yeah.
And both of our boys still have stuff here. They're 25 and
Mhm.
almost 23,
Yeah.
and they are comfortable with this gradual
Yeah.
shift of our home.
Yeah.
It wasn't just this automatic, you don't belong here anymore.
It's really, really important. And I see, I think some of the decluttering mindset out there and the sort of update mindset can get really rigid and not
Mhm.
like emotionless. And yes, there's emotional ties, but it doesn't mean that you just throw everything out and cut all your emotional ties. Actually, this ties in with this other unbelievable story. Wow. Another Japanese one. I mean, there was this woman who brought me in. I couldn't believe she let me in her home. I mean, there was no floor that was visible because there was so much stuff. It was
Oh,
like I was walking on and leftover lunch boxes, like disposable things. I mean, it was like there was this whole surface, and her bed was in the corners, a pile of stuff
hoarding.
around. It was hoarding, but it was building up like protection, like don't come near me. So
Right.
there's all kinds of, things that we can surmise might have happened to her where she felt that need to protect. And if you just get rid of somebody's protection like that, rigidly when they haven't built up an other form of inner defense and inner
Mhm.
strength, you are not helping them. That is not helping. So, yes, update the home for the daughter, have her bring some things with her, have her, but to immediately 100% do that hard right turn. Yeah, that's not how I suggest. It's not how I suggest anyone go through if they're doing the Marie Kondo approach, which I think is brilliant, actually. And there's some important reframing about what she does, or any other form of,
Mhm.
updating your relationship with your possessions. I think there's a certain gentleness, not to be clinical, not to completely override your emotions. I think
Right.
there's ways to do it in a really integrative way. What
Well,
did
and again,
Yeah, I just wanted to get
being,
into like the thing with Marie Kondo that I think is important because I think people assume that it's about getting rid of stuff and it's not. It's about what are you keeping?
well, yeah. And it's also about what is your relationship with stuff?
This is it.
It's just like, what's your relationship with money? What is your, like, I have a complicated relationship with money. I'm actually working with a coach now to
Hmm.
deal with that at 54. You'd think I
Yeah,
would have done that a while back, but
there's no set
those,
timeline for any of
what
that.
is your relationship with your stuff? And
Yes.
there are people that really, they like my, my son's fiance, her home about 6 years ago, 8 years ago, burned to the ground, and she had not much stuff left.
Mhm.
And talk about a reframe.
Yeah.
She still every once in a while be like, oh, yeah, I lost that in the fire. But most of the time, it's more like, well, we got rid of everything.
Mhm.
There's this reframe of starting over. There's
Yeah.
sadness, there's grief, because anything that she had of her father, who died when she was 6, was
Mhm.
gone.
Wow.
And at the same time, it either kills you or it makes you more resilient. It makes you bitter or it
Yes.
makes you more resilient.
Yeah. And maybe a little bit of both and, different flavors and it can
Yeah.
go back and forth. It's not all, one
Mm,
or the other. And, there's phases and there's no set
right.
timeline. And
Grief.
that's,
Right.
yeah,
It's
I
just
think
like
you have to
grief.
go through this process. When you talk about relationship, I talk about this a lot. I've got an 8-part program called The Story of Your Stuff. And it
Wow.
is literally all about your relationship with your possessions, but it's not just about the possessions, it's what those possessions mean. And I basically decode all of the different kinds of possessions so you understand that your relationship with your books is not just a relationship with books, it's your relationship with knowledge in your life
Well, and maybe relationship with a parent that you
or their
earned
relationship
that
with knowledge.
from.
That's right. And it's like, what's the family dynamic around
Right.
knowledge and wisdom, and how do you integrate that into your life? So if it's not
Hmm.
integrated in the home, it's not that whole mindset and that whole part of your life is, in a sense, not integrated in your life story. So I
Yeah.
think where people get confused with clutter, and it's kind of one of the hallmarks that I try to clarify, is the stuff is never the clutter. It's the
Hmm.
arrangement. how the stuff that's kept. So you say I have a lot of clutter. It's like, well, okay, but it's, your books are cluttered, so it's about your relationship with the books. So that's the clutter.
Right.
It's per se, clutter is the sign of a non-integrated relationship with how something expresses.
Oh my gosh. You just kind of blew my mind because my grandmother on my mom's side, clutter like
Hmm.
crazy,
Mhm.
piles, stacks of papers
Mm.
was basically her clutter. And I realized that was her relationship with money and communication
Communication
because there
and
were bills, there were letters, there were, it was just like piles of papers and bills and newspaper and
which is also agreements, a
mhm,
relationship with agreements, and how do you hold yourself or others to the fire? And this is what we agreed upon. This is what you're
mhm.
supposed to do, and so on and so forth. I'm going to keep this as a record. There's all kinds
Right.
of deep inner stuff where then once you get that inner connection to the story, your capacity to deal with that external face of it and the
Mhm.
unintegrated aspect of it changes. And Sophie
It's
has been,
so
she's
fascinating.
so generously been allowed me to share this wonderful photo of that she completely transformed her entrance when I explained the importance of the entrance and this is how you welcome yourself and anyone else home. And she realized, oh my gosh, I've just had it as this functional thing. It's not nice. And I've let it slide and all of this. And within a few hours, she transformed it into this absolutely gorgeous, like sitting meditation area with this chair and this beautiful, she updated the
Oh.
whole surface and but because she knew what the issue was and she was experiencing her life experience matched what I
Mm.
said, this is what you might be experiencing if this area is, not in order. And by in order, I also want to emphasize, because we see a whole lot of, home organization stuff where everything is, super minimalist. I am not a minimalist, um, and clinical in a sense, and it doesn't look lived in. And a lot of the interior design stuff out there doesn't look lived in. And bless Marie Kondo for her honesty and for, I mean, her absolute brilliance for acknowledging I've got 3 kids now and my home is not as tidy as it was before. Yes, different
Oh my
story.
gosh. That totally
No,
reminds me of,
that's not a
yeah,
failure. It's just
right.
reality. Like if your
It's where
desk,
you are in your life right now.
if I'm working at my desk, that's not the same as if I'm not working at my desk. There are things there because they are in use. Guess what? Your home is being used, you're living your story as opposed to, you're sitting in this airtight box where things are on display because a designer told you, as opposed to, no, I'm putting up things that mean something to me that remind me of
Mhm.
who I am and that serves as a kind of tuning fork. So that, you talk about resonance, so that you get to uplift your vibe, another sort of, little musical hello there in terms of, we talk about, it sounds new agey, talk about vibration, but, we talk about, what's the vibe? What's the atmosphere?
Right.
Atmosphere is also, if you think about science,
Mhm.
it's what's the quality of air? What's the height? What's the mood? There's all of these different qualities that refers to literal atmosphere. And when we talk about the atmosphere of the space that we're in, all of these things communicate that. Don't you want to have an atmosphere like where you feel the atmosphere and it communicates on those levels
Well,
as opposed to it just looks
and that it's in alignment with who you are.
who
I
you
just have
deeply
to
are? Yes.
I have to share this when my friend Greg Cittadini bought an Airstream. It's like super cool, nice Airstream. He and his wife, they're dear friends of ours, and I saw them in Portland, Oregon when I was there a few weeks ago. And he told me this funny story while we were hiking in the Columbia Gorge area. He said that first time they took it out and they ended up on this dirt road and they're bumping and they're hearing these rocks ping against their brand new Airstream. And they're both kind of going cringy, right? And they finally bring it in the next week to have these edges put on to protect the lower parts of the Airstream. And they bring it into the guy that has been working on it. And he says, "Oh, you've already taken this out." And Greg got all embarrassed. He's like, "Yeah." And the guy said, "I see these pristine Airstreams coming in and I wonder, do you ever use it?"
Yes.
And then he called them adventure dimples
Oh,
Adventure dimples.
love
And
it.
I immediately thought of our kitchen because we had our kitchen remodeled in 2020, and it is my favorite room in the house. I love to cook. I love to entertain. I love to feed people and nurture and nourish them. And our kitchen now reflects that. And I remember we put in a heated tile floor, and the
Uh-huh.
first night I had my KitchenAid going and I walked away for just a second and it literally vibrated. It had dough in it, vibrated off the high counter onto the tile floor. And I got two adventure dimples in my tile floor. And I was heartbroken for a moment. And then I thought, no, we use this. We
Yes.
live in this kitchen.
Yes. I
So
love it.
yes,
I mean, it's the same thing with
I love
wrinkles. Like, I
this.
am not going to be doing Botox or anything like this, whether you call them laugh lines or empathy lines or however it is you want to look at them. I mean, rather than becoming, this we're not, magazines are two-dimensional. The photographs are two-dimensional. We are three-dimensional or more, beings who are expressing and living a life and want a sign of humanity as
I
opposed
earned
to
this.
right, exactly. And who said that was Audrey Hepburn. She said that so beautifully that she was never going to do this. She's like, I earned every one of these lines. And your home, for its quirks, I mean, yes, there's the things that we can improve, and you speak to,
For sure.
improving that kitchen, and that was an upgrade, and that helped. But then the fact is, it gets used. So, there are the things that I suggest. You don't want the door to be sticky because, or it doesn't open fully, or it jams, or it squeaks, because it becomes this background annoyance that sort of, where it builds up, and it just sort of uh, means that you're
Breaks.
tolerate. Part of the story is I'm willing to tolerate things that annoy me,
Oh,
right? Instead of
yeah.
like doing a simple fix. And then that means, what are you going to encounter in the outside world if you're constantly reminding yourself that you're willing to tolerate things that you don't like when you could actually do something about them? So there's something that starts to happen when you make these improvements at home. And this isn't about making it perfect or I
No.
don't believe in this linear concept or magazine concept of perfection. It's really about, this streamline of experience where
Mhm.
there's this smoothness that puts you in this state of flow so that then when you go into the outside world, that's some of what you're bringing with you.
Just like your health.
That's
You
it.
make one small change that becomes routine and habit,
Mhm.
and you notice incremental improvement.
That's
And then
it.
you might be so inspired to make another small change. It doesn't take much. I'm going to drink more water today. This is how much water I'm going to drink today. You do that every day. And then all of a sudden you notice your skin looks nicer. You
Yes.
feel better. Your joints feel better. And then you think, I'm going to stand up for my calls for one call every day instead of sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly you realize you're not as fatigued. Your legs don't feel so crampy when you stand up. It's like all these little things. I want a label of healthy person.
Yeah.
So how do I earn that label? How do
Mhm.
I make sure that my life is in alignment with how I want to know myself?
Well, isn't it amazing? Because James Clear says that exactly, right? Like,
Yeah.
the author of Atomic Habits,
I
that
love that book, by
it's
the
amazing. And I
way.
had I was on his mailing list. I had the pre-order. I've been like on a
Yeah.
soapbox about
And
it.
have you read When by Daniel Pink?
I have not, but now I will.
Okay, so we'll have to, listeners, we will have links to Atomic Habits and When by Daniel Pink.
Mhm.
Um, and I will give you a little heads up, listeners. I didn't love the intro to Atomic Habits. And I have adaptability in my top talents, which means routine is not really a word in my vocabulary.
Mhm.
And it still was a very useful book for me. And so I recommend it. And then When I continue to come back to that book. So
Great. I look forward to
um,
that. So
let's,
I wanted to go back into what it
yes,
that he said, because there's two things. First of all, he said that, if you believe your self-concept is that I'm unhealthy, it's going to be harder to exercise. So you need that sort of self-concept so that the behavior follows. He then has an entire chapter that says that your environment is more important than motivation. Hello, functioning.
hmm
So how does your environment actually support, first of all, the concept of health? And if you see things like healthy plants that aren't dusty or a sort of plant graveyard, that speaks to that innate self-expression because plants don't doubt themselves. And you give them the right amount of food, water, soil, water, light, and all of
right.
that. And they thrive. And with people, it is the same thing. We tend to blame the person, whereas you wouldn't blame the plant. Whereas you need to look at, does this person have the right conditions in the way that each different kind of plant requires its unique conditions so
Exactly.
that it will thrive? And so his whole take on, if you want to do some push-ups or you want to do something, like just put the yoga mat out in the middle of the room so that you're going to, and even though you might think that's wrong shui, it's actually, no, for a period while you're acclimatizing, you are setting up the environment to support this new behavior and to develop these habits. And so, in a sense, not just the physical habits, but the internal, what are the stories we tell ourselves? Habits, because that's a habit. If you're repeating a script,
For sure.
when you change what you're looking at, the story's going to change. If you keep, Aunt Gladys's tea set out there and you hated Aunt Gladys and you don't like that tea set, but you hate her still, and she's
You
going
have
to
some obligation,
you have
right?
some obligation, then you are telling yourself every time you see it that you put other people's needs before your own in a way that doesn't serve yourself in your personal space.
Right.
Where
You're
you actually,
powerless.
where that's the one place in the world where ideally we're going to have some autonomy is in your own personal space. And, not everybody has lived, unfortunately, in circumstances where the home was that kind of refuge. And ideally, we get to a place where, in adulthood, if you live alone or if you share with the right people, then you're able to actually create that kind of environment. So, the stories we tell ourselves are inextricably linked with what it is that we're looking at, and we can change the script by updating our, what it is that we choose to express and anchor in the physical world that then starts giving us some different feedback. And TV commercials work in 30 seconds. Super Bowl advertisements, $7 million for 30 seconds of airtime the last 2 years. That's just the airtime, not the production cost. So if we're that susceptible, for lack of a better word, to what it is we look at and hear and see and all of that, and these combinations of images, colors, and storytelling in 30 seconds, what's the cost of what we look at for the value of what we look at for weeks, months, and years?
Ouch.
So that's how we,
I say ouch because
we can be selling ourselves short.
Yeah, for sure. You wouldn't even want to see what I've been putting up with for years because I just haven't taken the time to reorganize things. So that's what I've been doing for the last few days. And so that's why this conversation is especially meaningful to me, is I've been working on my vision board from January. This is something I don't usually do, but I did this with some friends. It says, less clutter, more calm. And when I realized that after I got back from an important backpacking trip, my first backpacking trip, that I was having a hard time with reentry. I wasn't motivated. My work was suffering. And I realized I'm going to take one thing from that vision board and I'm going to make something happen with it. And I saw the less clutter, more calm, and immediately started working on my office. So Mark, let's bring this around full circle. We need to wrap up. I know our listeners are finding this really interesting. I'm loving this. If you could offer one thing that people could do in 30 seconds every day to help their environment align with what they want in life, what is one thing they could do in, let's say, 2 minutes every day?
I think something that we rarely do, because our relationship with our homes is transactional, right? We move from one place to another, we go to the bookshelf, we get something, and we leave. We don't spend much time being still and listening with our eyes and looking with our ears to what's there. So one of the first things I get my students to do is stand somewhere for 30 seconds to 60 seconds and you do nothing. You just look. And you're going to start tuning into what's the message that's the background noise that I haven't been listening to, that's coming in through my eyes and through all of my senses. And you just look at this bookshelf. It's very hard. Like within 60 seconds, you're going to want to move something or you're going to want to straighten something up. Like you start to see differently because you're not just in motion moving past something. So you get to meet it. So if you did that,
some rooms are different from others, right? Like I do that in my kitchen all the time because that's my favorite room in the house.
Right.
But what about my office?
Yeah.
It's very transactional.
We rarely look at corners. And that was where, parents in our generation anyway would sometimes, you go stand in a corner if you were a naughty child. And that's
Right.
where, three straight lines intersect and the energy can get stuck because, you don't have straight lines in nature. And, it's sharp and antagonistic and aggressive and all of that. And that's where, it becomes this collecting point for clutter and dust bunnies and all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
Take a look at your corners and see what's there.
Ah, I love it.
Stand on yourself and see what's there. But any,
That's
quote unquote
perfect.
problem and not seeing it as a problem, it is what it is.
Right.
It's a situation, it's a whatever. You go up and you stand there and you don't have to do anything then. You just get to look for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. Notice how you feel because then you start listening. And when that starts to change, you're not relying on extrinsic motivation. There's more an inner source that's
Hmm.
fueling some more, a way to bridge consciously the inside and outside and to change that whole
For
arrangement.
sure.
Yeah,
For sure. Yep. At that moment, you get to decide, what am I going to do next?
that's it.
And just bringing awareness to it is a
Mhm.
critical factor. Mark, thank you so much for joining me for this recording. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much. I've absolutely loved every second of it.
Listeners, it's your turn. What will you do? Which room will you start? Where you stand there for 60 seconds. Close your eyes for a moment. Sense what you're feeling or hearing in that room. Are there any noises? Is there a hum? Do you have chimes outside, wind chimes outside? What are you hearing? Are these sounds that are agreeable to you? Do they light you up? Do they inspire? Then open your eyes. Look around you. Does that room make you feel good? Or does it make you feel busy and heavy? What can you change today in that room? Something small that will inspire you to continue to make small changes, incremental improvements. I am so curious to hear your thoughts about this episode. Please send me a message at the email address on my website at elkinsconsulting.com or comment on any of the social media shares that you see of this episode. They'll be on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and maybe even TikTok. So please interact with this episode. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for listening.
You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.